So I have been so excited to do this panel. My book, Wilder Magic, came out just this past week. And when I was planning events that I wanted to do around the release of my book, this was the one panel that I knew I had to do. So I'm just so excited to be doing this and so excited that Malaprops was awesome. And we are doing this with you guys because I live in Minnesota now. I know that's my bio, but I lived in Appalachia for 8 years and Malaprops was my bookstore to go to. So I knew I had to do this panel with Malaprop. So thank you so much for hosting us. And I think we're all going to start by talking about our books to begin with, and then we'll kind of go from there. So my book that released just this past Tuesday, yay, is A Wilder Magic. And this is my magical Appalachian story. And it is light historical. It's based off of the history in Appalachia of dam creation, of the Tennessee Valley Authority coming around after the Great Depression and making dams and flooding entire towns and moving out families. So my main character, Sibylline Shaw, I have to show the back though too, because it's like the most beautiful art. Isn't that gorgeous? I know, it's beautiful. And Sibylline is like tiny in there. So Sibylline has magic and she knows that her home is about to be flooded and she refuses to leave. She tries everything that she can to stop this dam from being made, but of course she can't stop it from being made. So she uses her magic and stays in her home, even though her home is flooding. And what ends up happening is that essentially the lake keeps rising and she ends up below the lake itself. So it's all about her deep ties to the mountains and her roots inside of the valley, this beautiful valley she loves. And of not wanting to leave, of resisting change, which was basically my story as I was having to leave Appalachia and move back to my childhood home in Minnesota. So that is my magical Appalachian story with some beautiful magic tied into the nature, a lot of nature, and talking about how beautiful the mountains are, and talking a little bit about the history in Appalachia too. So that's my story. Daka? Oh, mute yourself, or unmute, I mean. Hey.
Sorry, everybody. So this is my novel, Hide and Seeker, and it's set in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I grew up. I think all my novels will be set there. And it is a story about a group of kids who attend the welcome home party of a friend who disappeared a year ago and mysteriously returned, but he returned not quite right. And after playing the game, kids began to disappear one by one, and the kids have to figure out what's happening, where the kids are going, and once they get to where this magical place is, find a way to save themselves. And I think of it as a story about like teamwork and different types of families and friendship. And there's also themes of like grief and loss. And I think, Juliana, you mentioned about, it was something about in your book of what you were going through and you were experiencing. One of the characters is really going through grief and loss, and I was going through that at the exact same time. And this book came about from like a chant that we had when we played hide and seek as a kid in Chattanooga on this really particular street, and I used that to sort of inspire me to write this creepy story that I love. So that's a little bit about Hide and Seeker. Ash?
Make sure I unmute myself. Okay, so I don't actually have the hard copy of my book that's coming out this September, but I wanted to talk about it. So here it is on my phone, and it's backward, but it says A Touch of Ruckus. And I'm so excited to share this with everyone. So this is a story about Tennessee Lancaster, a young girl who has experienced a lot of loss in her life. She is the middle child's middle child. So she is a big peacemaker in her family. And she has this gift of being able to touch objects and feel strong memories that other people have left in them. And she's kind of used that as her cheat sheet to get through life and keep things smooth for her whole family. So she's working behind the scenes always. So she gets this chance to go and stay with her grandmother up in the mountains in North Carolina. And so she kind of takes it because she's like, this is the big rest I've been looking for. My family's exhausting me. But as soon as she goes there, she starts touching objects in her grandmother's old growth forest. And instead of receiving memories from them, she releases ghosts from them. And they start haunting her the whole time she's there. So the ghosts have something to tell her. Her new friend Fox is determined to go ghost hunting. And there are themes of mental health awareness, generational communication, interdependence, a little bit of eco-activism too, which I'm really excited about. I love the book. I love ghosts, so I'm so excited to share it with readers. Cindy?
Oh, I just have to say, hearing about all of y'all's books makes me so excited to read them all. They all sound amazing. And Daka, I'm dying to know what your hide and seek chant was, so you'll have to tell us that later. So I am Cindy Baldwin, and I, like my bio mentioned, I live in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon now, but I grew up for most of my life in Durham, North Carolina. And so far, all of my books have been set in various parts of North Carolina because it's somewhere I still visit regularly. It's somewhere I love so deeply. It feels like inextricably connected to my soul. My first book is called Where the Watermelons Grow, and my second one is Beginner's Welcome. And then my third one, which comes out next month, which I honestly had never said the words, my book comes out next month until today. So that shows you about where my brain is in 2021. My next one is called The Stars of Whistling Ridge. And this is my book. This is my magical Appalachian story. It's set in a small fictional town that is, a lot of it is based on my memories of visiting my grandparents who lived in Hendersonville, just outside Asheville, North Carolina, for my whole growing up. And we were really close with them. We visited them a lot. My grandma died when I was 10, and my mom, as the oldest kid, took on a lot of responsibility around that. And so we would, for a while there, we would go visit every weekend. And there were just so many aspects of that area that felt so magical to me, and that I really wanted to draw on in this book. Like Ash, I don't actually have physical arcs of this one. And so this is like my little cover, my cover thing. But the Stars of Whistling Ridge is about a girl named Ivy, whose mother is a fallen star. And as a fallen star, it's her job to tend to the magic that undergirds the world. And because of that, for Ivy's whole life, they have lived in an RV. And Ivy's almost 13, and she's just hit this age where she feels like the thing that she needs more than anything else is she needs a forever home, a place that she can put down roots. And so one day she sneaks out and steals her mama's whole collection of wishes, and she releases them to use them to wish for a forever home. But she breaks all of the rules of wishing in the process, and a bunch of disasters combine to strand her family in the small town of Whistling Ridge, where her mama's sister lives. And when they get there, they learn that something's draining the magic out of Whistling Ridge, and Ivy and her family have to work together with some new friends to see if they can figure out what is draining the magic from Whistling Ridge and how to stop it. And Ivy has to figure out if she can convince her parents that they need to stay and make this their forever home. So I'm really excited. I love all my books equally, but this is definitely the one that was the most fun to write. Like, it was just pure joy from beginning to end. And so I'm really excited to share that with the world.
I love how like all of our books have that theme, that awesome middle grade theme of like truly unintended consequences of going into something with like the best intentions and then horrible things happen. Like that's such a good middle grade theme. But Cindy, you are not the only one whose brain is like in pandemic, because last week before my book released, I had some of my coworkers walk by and they were like, how many more days are left? And I said, 26 days, because I was thinking of when the school year ended. And they were like, no, nope. And I was like, I can't even think of anything else except school. So I totally understand how your brain is. Okay, so I think we've all talked a little bit about inspiration, but if we want to go through and talk some more about like where our story ideas came from. So mine was, when I started writing this book, I only knew that I wanted to write a book that would explain to people back here in Minnesota why it was so hard for me to leave. because as we all know, Appalachia has stereotypes, and like sometimes those are really hard to explain away to people who are from other parts of the country. And so I really wanted to write a book that would explain my deep and undying love of the mountains and the people who live there. So that was all I knew before I started writing. Like, I thought it was going to be a story about like witches and curses, and all of that was completely wrong. All of that got deleted, and I ended up writing a story about the history in Appalachia, which was even better because then I got to write real, true characters in the story, instead of like, the witch which actually might be correct for Appalachia too, the witch down the street that knows all the herbs in the mountains and everything. But so I wanted to write a book about my love for the mountains and include the history in it, that people in other places of the country could read and see like that complete respect and how hardworking people are, and like see their souls and the spirits, and how hard it is, or how hard it was for people to move because some of that history of the dam creation. So yeah, that was my biggest inspiration for writing my book.
I can go next. So growing up in the South and in Tennessee, when I think about it, and some of my best childhood memories are playing with my friends and my family outside, like playing games, kickball, like red light, green light, freeze tag, like all playing these games and playing them until it got dark. And then we would catch fireflies. We would run around. So we could go outside and play until the lights came on or our families came to get us. But other than that, you were just out all day playing with your friends. And I love also, when I think of it, I think of the smell of honeysuckles. Anytime I go home and I can smell that, I think of home. And so I knew that I wanted to write a book about that experience of growing up and playing these games with my friends. And hide and seek was the game that I think I enjoyed the most as a kid. Looking back on it now, it seems a little creepy. It's like hunting kids for sport, and they can be anywhere. And so that's sort of where the idea, I'm like, this is actually a creepy game. And I think, Cindy, you asked me, so the chant in the book is, it sounds like this. I went up the hill was muddy, stomped my toe and made it bloody. Should I wash it? And a little while ago, I went home and my family and friends, that came up and we were like, where did this chant come from? When people play hide and seek, they count. Why do we talk about bloody toes and being stomped on? And no one to this day knows where the chant came from. It was only said in this one particular street, where my grandmother lives, nowhere else. And so once we started talking about that and I started thinking about the creepy game, I was like, okay, this is the story. And so I really wanted to tap into the fact that, you're looking for missing kids, but then what if you don't find them? Like, what if it's not just you searching for them, something else is searching for them and something else is taking them, and then you get taken, and then where do you go? And what happens? So that's where the book came from. When I was writing it, I thought I was writing an action adventure mystery. And then someone said, no, it's horror. And I'm like, really? Because I'm a big scaredy cat. I don't do horror. And they're like, no, that's what you're writing. So keep going because kids like it. So I just kind of tapped into all the things I'm afraid of or was afraid of as a kid. And that sort of became the basis of who the seeker was and the fears that he uses against them. So that's hide and seeker.
I just want you to know I'm never going to look at the game of hide and seek the same ever again.
I hear that a lot now. Ash, what about you?
Okay, so agree. I actually found myself like looking behind after I read your book, Daka. I was like looking behind the shower curtain, which I haven't done in like 10 years probably. Like that's a long time for me. And I was like, ooh, I have to check under my bed and behind my shower curtain. It's good. I love it. Okay, so I guess my inspiration for Touch of Ruckus was like a lot of things just meshed in together. Partly it was because I was having a conversation. I grew up in a big family, like cousins cousins on cousins. I think like if you count like my first cousins and second cousins all together, we have something like 40. There's a lot. So like when we get together for like family reunions, like there's so many middle children and people who were essentially middle children, because like if you live in the same small town and you have a lot of cousins, like essentially they're siblings. So I remember growing up feeling like a little bit responsible for other people all the time. And my middle kid was like, why is it that the books are always about firstborns, or responsible firstborns, or only kids, or like precocious babies of the family, but the people who are mild don't get books? And I was like, that's a good point. I was like, all right, so let's write a book about a middle child. And I was thinking about the sort of things that I loved when I was a kid. I loved going and visiting my grandparents. Again, like I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and they had like a lot of old stuff, like meat grinders that you like anchored to the countertop, and like old stuff that like you might not necessarily know what it's for anymore. Because I had like extended great grandparents that lived on farms also, and like when they passed away, like they still lived in a house that didn't have indoor plumbing. So like I was always enthralled. I wanted to be able to touch things and like relive things in the past, right? So I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a character that had the ability to actually see that, and then maybe not like everything they saw and not be able to be responsible for it. So also in my family, and I think maybe in a lot of families in rural areas where like mental health care isn't available, and so it's kind of stigmatized, it's tough to talk about those things with the people inside of your family. So if you're really perceptive, you pick up on it, but you don't talk about it directly necessarily because no one's quite sure how to address it or what to do about it. So I really wanted to write a book that kind of incorporated all those themes of the past and noticing things and knowing things, but not being able to share them with each other, and to bridge all of that and come to a place where people are able to live kind of interdependently and talk about things more openly. So that was my big vat of inspiration stew, and a book kind of came out of it, which I love. So yeah. Cindy?
Oh, that just sounds like such a fascinating combination of topics and things. So I always love talking about where my book inspirations come from, because I feel like they always come from really weird places. And this, of all of my books, is the favorite weird inspiration, because this book was inspired by an autocorrect. And a couple years ago, I was trying, and I don't even remember what I was doing, but I was trying to Google something about the book Little Women. And I was typing it in on my phone, and for whatever reason, I was like swipe typing, and I tried to type Little Women, and what came out was Little Winnebago. And a Winnebago is a type of RV camper. And I was just like, why? Like, why would my phone ever think that I was trying to type Little Winnebago and not Little Women, which, I mean, statistically, like, people have to type women a whole lot more than they type Winnebago. Anyway, but I was like, but I would read a book called Little Winnebago. Like, I wonder what that book would be about. And so that was kind of the initial like spark for the book. I just thought it was kind of a charming idea. And that was like the first name of the book while I was working on it, was The Little Winnebago, until I did some polling and realized that 11-year-olds don't know what Winnebago is and have no interest in learning. So, but then it just kind of got all mixed up in my head with this idea about fallen stars and wishes that are fireflies, because like Daka said, like I also spent so much time when I was growing up in North Carolina catching fireflies at night. And so, and as I was writing, it was definitely one of those instances where I thought I was writing a book about one thing, and I ended up writing a book that was sort of about that, but also about a lot of unplanned stuff. I sat down to write a book about the fact that home is more expansive than we think it is, and it doesn't always have to be tied to a place. And that is kind of the central theme of this book. But I also, unexpectedly to me, ended up writing a book that was a lot about anger and about how it feels to be a young, angry girl, and how you deal with that anger and how we can find like healthy ways to release and process anger rather than holding on to it and becoming bitter. And that was that, like I mentioned, that was really unexpected. And when I was writing this book, like I was very angry. It was a very angry year that I was writing this. And I was kind of asking a lot of these same questions for myself. And it wasn't until I had like almost gotten to the end of the book that I was like, well, I feel like my subconscious is trying to tell me something here. So it was, writing it was a really, really interesting journey. And I feel like I'm still kind of tossing around in my head a lot of the ideas that I came to in this book about anger and how anger, can shape our lives and how we can deal with being angry girls, which I still feel like I am. So anyway, so that's kind of where it came from. And like I mentioned, I grew up going all the time to visit my grandparents, and I knew that I wanted it to be set in this setting that felt so magical to me.
I had a quick question though to follow up on that, Cindy, and just for everyone, do you feel like when you're talking about anger, and like I know there's grief and everyone else has specific themes or emotions in their books, sometimes because I didn't set out to write a book about like grief or loss or, the death of a parent. I mean, again, it was supposed to be like, a monster doing something. But as I was writing and revising, these things came up. And I realized too, like I was dealing with like the loss of a parent. And that sort of then became a theme in the book. And sometimes I say, I feel like the book is almost a little bit of therapy. Like there's a little bit of you or there's parts of you in the character, and you're able to work through personal things from sort of like a distance, because it's like, for me, my main character is a boy, but it's still, he's going through the emotions that, I went through, still go through. And it's sort of a way for me to like deal with it and heal. And so I was just wondering if everyone else or someone else has that same experience or found that as they were writing.
That's super funny that you say that, because that is exactly what I was going to say after Cindy was talking, because like all of my books I've finished and then thought, oh, I wasn't just writing a book, I was writing this very specific thing about myself, but I never know what that thing is until the book is done. Like it's helping you process something, but it is that subconscious idea of like, oh, my inner parts of my brain are processing something, but I don't realize it until the story's done. So it's interesting you say that too.
I feel like I do a really great job of compartmentalizing or something, because I often just will have I will not mentally connect what I'm writing about to an experience I've had. But it's so there. I think the weirdest instance was with my first book, Where the Watermelons Grow, which is about a daughter coping with her mother's illness. I wrote that when my daughter, who you have probably seen popping in and out here, I wrote that when she was 2, and I don't have schizophrenia, which is the illness discussed in the book, but I am a disabled and chronically ill mom. And when my daughter was 2, she was starting to talk, and she was asking questions all the time about my sickness, and she was getting angry about the things I couldn't do. And so that was a huge thing that defined our relationship. And that she was starting to ask questions like, are you always going to be sick? Well, when are you going to be better? Well, when are you going to be able to do that with me? Well, when are you going to be able to do that with me? And so that all really went into this book, but I totally didn't think of it that way when I was writing it. I just was like, oh, this is just an interesting story. And it's like, has nothing to do with my life. And then when I finished it, one of my critique partners, I took a walk with her after she read it, and she was like, so this book is you writing your fears for your daughter, right? And I was like, no. And then I like took a beat and I was like, okay, actually, yes, it's eerily reminiscent of my life and of our relationship, and kind of my projections of my fears about how my kid's going to feel about me as she grows up. And so, yeah, I don't know how my brain can like so neatly close off to that, but I always seem to find unexpected messages.
I am an angry kid. I've always had like a really strong sense of like, that's right and that's fair and that's not fair. So like, I think that I am always so worried that I'm going to be like surprised by my anger, that I really go hard on processing it like all the time because I don't want it to like pop out. But fear is my big thing. Like fear, like things that I'm subconsciously afraid of definitely worm their way into storylines. Like the one I just talked about, definitely I've been concerned that like we have a lot of like different health quirks and neurodivergent quirks in our family, which is amazing and awesome. And also like there's a lot of work that goes into making that translate to the outside world and vice versa. And my second born does that a lot of the translating. And I think I was subconsciously worried about her being resentful. Which is where a lot of the, I mean, none of my characters are like one-to-one real life to fiction characters, but there's a lot of like exploring that, like what might that resentment look like if I don't do my work, or if this should happen, it's beyond my control. So interestingly, like my third book is I very purposefully waited like 3 whole books to actually write about what I'm writing about in my third book because I know there's a lot there, and that's like an area that I'm actually aware of. So I actually sat on that. I was like, I need to very purposefully process this specific thing or it's gonna get ugly. So like some things I feel like it's okay for me to like let worm into, and some of it I'm like, ooh, this needs to like not be a bleeding wound while I'm writing it. So I guess it's like a, I don't know, whatever feels right for that particular book, I kind of go with that. Yeah.
That is fantastic, Ash, and it makes me super curious about the next book you're writing that I hope you send to me so I can critique, please. I always like how on panels when you're like, please will everybody send me their books? Okay, so the next question we have is, what parts of Appalachian culture did we weave into our stories? So my book ended up turning into like a survival story about halfway through. And in that part of the book, the kids are like, the 2 girls that are stuck under the lake are extremely self-sufficient. You know, they're 12-year-olds and they've lived for 12 years in the middle of this valley on their parents' farms. And so you see a lot of how they live off of the land and how they know their land extremely well. So I put a lot of that into it. I put a lot of food into it, and food that they're, you know, growing from the garden and then creating from scratch. So I have a lot of that in it. I wish I were the kind of author who could naturally weave in some more of the dialect like Ash does. You are so good at that, but it does not sound authentic coming from me. So I stuck with like the food and the stories and the history for my story.
I'm having to think about that because I know like for mine, since it's like supernatural, they go to a different place. It's just, you know, a world built on like fear there in the second half of the book. I think for me, it's more, it's sort of that, I think someone mentioned it too. It's like that culture of that, like everyone knows everyone. Everyone, your neighbor is also your family. Like there's always this interconnection. And with these kids, I wanted to show that even though they're in this small neighborhood in this southern town, and they all have different situations happening with their family. Some have, you know, family members who are in jail. Some are single mothers. Some have lost some of their parents. But there's just this community that help and rally around each other. And, you know, it's sort of like that whole theme of like, it takes a village. And usually you say that about parents raising kids, but in this instance, it was like the kids sort of raising themselves and helping each other and working together and that teamwork. And a little bit of that, of when I think of like Tennessee and Chattanooga, and for some reason, even with the second book, and that's the setting, I've made it sort of like the hellmouth of Buffy, where all of these things are happening to these kids. And that's not to say that I thought, growing up in this particular area was bad. It was just all of these really strange, creepy things that happen with these different characters that you find in the South that, go beyond like the general stereotypes that you get or that you hear about Southern characters, but everybody has a story. And they're very open with sharing, even if you don't want to hear it. And so I wanted to just have that in my story, like have everybody have their own story and have it building up to something and connecting stories in some kind of way. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I think about it.
I relate to that so strongly. Oh my goodness. Everybody is in everybody's business, like always, right? Like I feel like every time the common thread, like culture-wise, it's okay, you can come over. The common thread culture-wise, like throughout the stories, is that everyone is a little bit too independent. At least where I came from, everyone just has got, I can do it, I'm gonna prove myself, I don't need help from anybody, but everybody helps everybody anyway. Like the interdependence is there, but there's like this little sheen, this little fake sheen of I can do it, I've got this, it's fine, I don't need anybody's help. So I think the common thread is like, there's a lot of gossips, but like big gossips, they're like, I noticed that she was selling off her good china. We need to check on her. We need to ask her what her situation is. Like, there's a lot of that, like, go check in on them. Are they all right? I don't like that guy that they're dating. And it's like, even the older people, like even the older women, and the older men. And so I think there's a lot of people being up in each other's business, but in the most loving way possible. Even if it seems a little bit crusty and salty on the outside, there's a lot of love behind it, which is my favorite thing to weave in, I think.
I love that. And Juliana, I'm so glad you asked me about the Appalachian culture and what you incorporated, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So y'all may know this, but a lot of people don't know that there is a genre of folk music that is literally called Appalachian murder ballads.
Yes, I love them.
I am totally obsessed with like Appalachian murder ballads. And I say that to people who aren't familiar with the area and they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like a lot of the folk music from Appalachia is about like people dying, people killing themselves, people killing their lovers, people killing their lovers' lovers. Like it's really dark and really bizarre. And I just find it endlessly fascinating. And in one of this kind of the historical mystery storyline that is part of the Stars of Whistling Ridge, I took a lot of inspiration from that tradition of Appalachian murder ballads, to the point that actually my editor, like, she had me work a lot to add more depth to my kind of villain character, because originally she was just like super awful and totally irredeemable. And I was like, but that's how an Appalachian murder ballad is. Like people are just really, really dark and weird, But my editor wisely felt like there was more depth to be had. And so we added more. But so there's a story, and there is actually a ballad in the book as well that kind of tells the story of this person, and it follows it kind of echoes a lot of the famous songs and traditions in oral storytelling and folk music in Appalachia. And I had such a fun time doing that. And I also, this is not a very big part of the book, but there's one of the sisters in the story who loves to sing. And so she's singing a lot. And there's one scene where she sings a line of a ballad that like nobody has ever heard, but it's a ballad that my great grandmother used to sing. And so everybody in my extended family knows this song. And it's this old Scottish ballad. And my great grandma always used to sing it at family reunions. And so it was really cool to kind of like put that little tidbit in that I'm like, nobody who's not a Watson is going to know what this is, but it was a cool kind of callback and ability to, to bring some of like my heritage and my family into that.
Now I'm super curious to hear it. Like I've got to hear it. That's awesome.
Well, I'm hoping they're doing an audiobook, and I sent recordings so that the audiobook narrator could sing the songs. So I'm hoping that the audiobook narrator will be willing to like sing as she reads. So we'll see.
That would be like spectacular. Yeah, and I did not know about those until I moved and like started learning more about why Dolly Parton is so incredible and everybody in the South is like obsessed with her and hearing those murder ballads. But we should drop a line like, because isn't Ghostwood Song by Erica Waters like heavily? Yeah, that is all. So if anybody watching hasn't read that and really loves or wants to know about the murder ballads, like her book is heavily inspired by those too. And I know we're getting close to our Q&A time, but did we have any other like questions anybody else wanted to throw out before we do Q&As? I think Daka, you maybe wanted to ask about covers, or was there anything
I
else?
did wanted to I wanted to ask about everyone's covers of like, I know when I first saw mine, I was scared to death. I called my dad and my sister and I said, oh my God, this is too scary. I can't. They had to talk me off the ledge and say, no, it's great. Kids love scary. This is good, but because I'm such a scaredy cat, it's like, for me, it was like terrifying, but now I love the cover. But initially I was like, oh my goodness, maybe this is too much for kids, because, you want to be spooky, but you don't want to traumatize them for the rest of their lives or torment them in any way. So I wanted to see if anyone else had any like reactions to their cover or thoughts when they first saw it.
No, Daka, you probably aren't traumatizing the kids, but the adults. Because I have your book and I'm too scared to read it because I'm a total scaredy cat. It's just, oh, you're muted.
Oh, I said me too. Like they gave me a giant movie-sized poster of this. My friends did. It's under my bed because I had it in my bedroom and I was like, I can't look at that. I just can't do it. I was a nightmare. So I love them for it. I'm sorry if they're watching, but yeah, it's hidden away.
That's awesome. I had no idea what I wanted for the cover for this one. And so when they sent it to me, I was like stunned because I love the colors and it's super bright. And I like too that like it's a specific scene in my book. Oh wait, am I holding that the right angle? Of her when she's like physically with her magic, like holding the water back. And so I really like that this was a specific scene in the book and it was just so bright and beautiful. So I was very excited about this cover, especially because I had no idea what I wanted from it. So they did a good job.
So I love my cover so much. I think that I got the first like official mock-up while I was out of town and I just stared at it here. I'll hold it up again, even though it's backward. I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can get the glare gone. Okay.
It's not backwards for us. You're good.
That's not, oh, good. That's great. So I love this cover. The artist is actually, I think, from North Carolina, I think themselves, or herself. It made me, number one, I think the colors are so beautiful. They really captured the feeling of like being in the mountains and the woods. But the thing that I love the very most is Fox, like the best friend character, I guess, or the best new friend character for Tennessee, is non-binary. And so the artist was excellent. They sent me like several drafts and was like, we really want to get this right. This is important to us. And so like we went back and forth, like tweaking hairstyles and clothes styles and like, I guess like body posture. And they were so generous to put so much work into it. And when I saw the final version, I cried like so hard because when I was a kid, like there was nothing like that. Like nothing like that existed. And like I guess it was one of those, like I compartmentalized that so hard. I didn't realize how much it was going to mean to me to see it. And when I did, like my inner 13-year-old just like started bawling, doing the ugly cry, like in the best way possible. So I was so excited about it and so pleased. Sometimes I still just like, I have it on my phone as like my background so that I can see it all the time because it makes me so happy. So yeah, that's my cover story for Touch a Ruckus.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's just like makes my heart feel all warm and fuzzy. So I am just completely obsessively in love with this cover. I love it so much. And one of the cool things I love, first of all, that there's all these details. I don't know how well it shows up here, but you can see her RV in the background and the campfire at the campground. And you can see that she's holding a jar of the wish fireflies. And then there's fireflies swirling out, and you can see them reflected in the lake. And it's just like so beautiful. And when they first sent the cover to me, the artist had created 2 different sketches, which were called like sketches, but they were completed covers. The artists are amazing. And this sketch was originally purple, and I don't know if you can see, but it was very purple, and it was beautiful. But she had sent another one over that I didn't like the design of as much, but it was beautiful. It was blue, and it was just like so gorgeous. And so I wrote back and I was like, well, can we combine them? Like, can we take the color scheme of one and the design of another? And I didn't know if they would do it, or if, how sales and marketing would feel about it or anything, but they ended up, they brought it back, and it was like the cover of my dreams. So I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, I think your cover, Cindy, is just like so eye-catching and stunning. And so they did a really good job. And it's nice in the purple, but the blue is even better.
Yeah, I just feel like it like totally captures like exactly the sense of like lyrical magic that I was going for. I love it.
Yeah, that's good.
It's like
Stephanie,
magical firefly vibes. Sorry. I
no,
love
you're
it.
good. Stephanie, are we at like Q&A time? Do we have like questions to go through, or?
We are, and we do. And so first, I just want to say thank you all. It's been delightful to sit in on your conversation. So I just want to encourage everyone who is watching again to buy these books and support y'all in what you're doing and read these wonderful stories. So it's been great to listen to you. So we have a few audience questions. I'll dive right in. I'm gonna combine a couple. One of them, I think most of you have maybe already answered a little bit too, but I'll go ahead and ask in case there's anything to fill in. So Samantha's asking, when you first came up with the idea for your book, did you always know it would be set in Appalachia? Or did the setting come later? And then also, what do you find personally magical about Appalachia? And that's for everybody. And so, yeah.
I for sure knew that I needed to set a book in Appalachia. Well, I already kind of talked about that, but there is not a lot about Appalachia that's not really truly magical. Like the heart of Appalachia feels like magic for me personally. So that was very easy for me to weave into my story. Not actually talking about the actual magic in the book, but like the magic of how beautiful the mountains are and the people who live there and the spirit of the place and the culture always felt very magical to me.
For mine, at first it was set in Georgia because I lived in Georgia for a little while, but then as I started writing it, Tennessee was where I was born, and I was there actually until high school. And Juliana mentioned it too. It's the spirit of the place. It's the people, it's the culture, it's the food, it's the smells. It's it's like its own character. I think the South is the settings of everything. And so I really wanted to play homage to that being home. I've been in California now, where I am now, for a long time, but I still consider the South my home. That's where my family is. Those are where my best memories are. And so I just wanted to really maybe have people fall in love with those places. If they've never heard of Chattanooga, Tennessee, maybe you want to go, you won't get taken or go missing, hopefully, like in the book, but you could just experience all the wonderful other things that go along with being or living in Tennessee. So that was sort of important to me. And even what I'm writing now, it's going to be set in Tennessee because that's just where my heart is.
I am Appalachian through and through. I don't know anything more, or I don't know like anything else. I've lived, I guess, in Washington for 2 years now, and I scrubbed my, well, okay, I have this ongoing argument with my agent. I say I don't have a Southern accent, and she says, you have such a Southern accent. But like, yeah, I probably won't ever write anything that's not in Appalachia, just because it's where my heart is. There's so much richness and community. Sometimes it's a misunderstood place, and a lot of people get erased out of Appalachian stories, because people are dedicated to like one strict narrative of Appalachia, and therefore a lot of people get ignored that are very important to Appalachia. So I'll probably just keep writing it until somebody tells me I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I love that. And I had to laugh about your Southern accent comment because I did not realize until I got married that my grandfather apparently has a Southern accent. And my husband said something about it after meeting him. And I was like, no, he just sounds normal. Like, anyway, so that's how I learned that if you're used to it enough, you don't really hear Southern accents. But so I always like from the beginning, this story idea was really connected to kind of like the Blue Ridge Mountains and the area around Asheville. And there's a lot of stuff about the kind of the relationships that my main character develops with her aunts and kind of like the female relatives in her family that tied in a lot with my memories and my love and relationship with my grandma, who I'm actually named after. And so kind of all of that wrapped up as I was conceptualizing this story, and it just always was going to be set in this small town in the mountains, because it just felt like the perfect place to kind of explore all these different story elements.
Thank you. Yes, and it's yeah, and the magic is just there, like regardless of whether or not you are talking about any sort of spell casting, although that does happen here, right? I mean, we've got plenty of witch in Asheville, for instance, but there's also just there is a sense of magic in in the place, in the spaces, in the people relationships. So that's and it's obviously reflected in the work you're doing. So. That's wonderful. I have a question about scaring children. Because I just want to say that we're in general, and we as a Malaprops family are just hardcore fans of middle grade and young adult authors and what y'all do in terms of speaking to young readers rather than at them, and walking with them rather than telling them who they should be, right? Like there's so much of that that's happening now that is inclusive and nurturing and lets kids see themselves, right? And then on top of that, there's also just super fun stories, and kids like to be scared, right? So, but that's a really, I feel like that must be a really tough balance to achieve, where you're sort of leaning into the fact that kids actually do like to tell and hear scary stories. But of course, also there's a certain responsibility for young psyches to deal with these scary stories and with any sort of traumatic elements that might be addressed in your fiction in a way that really works for young readers and is in the end safe. Right. So I'm just interested in what y'all have to say about that sort of balance, when you're writing about these sort of magical and potentially scary elements.
I'm like waiting for Ash and Daka to take that one away.
Yeah, I should have said, I mean, the more overtly scary ones, I guess, are Daka's and Ash's, but anytime you're writing about sort of supernatural stuff, there's that element of like just being a little creeped out, right?
Yeah, well, I think too, like so much of Appalachian culture is about telling stories or stories of families or even of like being in the mountains and hearing people talk about the panthers in the mountains and like how they scream, and like that's really scary, and that's a part of being there and staying safe. Like the storytelling and how people talk about the stories in their families, like there's something inherently scary about a lot of those too. So I feel like there's a lot of truth to that type of storytelling that makes its way into our stories too. And if there isn't a little bit of that creep factor, it feels not completely true. You know, because my book does turn into a survival story, and it gets really bad underneath the lake. And like there is something really scary about that, but it's all about how you stay alive in the middle of the mountains. Yeah, so a little bit of the scary is in there too, but not as overtly as some of yours.
Daka, since you have, I think everyone voted, yourself included, the scariest cover. Do you want to take that next?
Sure. And again, like I have to say it, I didn't set out to write a scary novel. I really thought it was like a mystery or an action adventure. I literally was going to comp it as Goonies. Like that's where my mind was, and it took a life of its own. And again, I really am a scaredy cat. I definitely am. It was, and these were not stories I typically were drawn to. I realize now going back that I did watch a couple scary movies growing up as a kid, but mostly because my friends were watching them and I wanted to be cool and be able to talk about them. But I was terrified along like months after I had seen something. So for me, I sort of keep myself in mind as I'm writing these things, like what scares me, what would be too scary for me. I really want to interject comedy moments, physical humor, jokes, like have a character that can sort of lighten the tension so it's not scary at all. And I have gotten letters from like parents or teachers like, is this going to be appropriate for my kid? And I'm always like, read it first or read it with your child, because your child and what scares them. This probably would have been scary for me as a kid. But I know in dealing with my nephews, they want more scary. It's like, it's not scary enough because they love that adrenaline rush. They like being afraid. Again, that was never naturally me as a child. So I think when I'm writing, I'm always thinking about young Daka and what she could maybe handle or not handle, and not making it. I guess it's they're scares and their fears, but they're also based on things that kids are dealing with, more so like a loss or someone growing old or being alone. So those are the things that I'm focusing on more so, and they're sort of just manifested in this monster, but they're still emotions that they're dealing with. So that's what I sort of try to work through.
That's awesome. I was an adrenaline junkie as a kid. I really loved being scared. I think I watched Rosemary's Baby when I was 8. I would go to my grandma's house, and then she had no idea what I was watching on reruns. So I would just go to the old television and like turn it on while she was working. I think the thing that keeps it, the funny thing is, like, I'm also a very fearful person, or an anxious person is probably a better way to put it. And I think that I've always used like horror as a way to combat my anxiety. So I think while I'm writing, there's always a happy ending. Like, no one ever passes away unseen. Not in a horror way anyway. And like Daka said, I lighten it up with a lot of levity and humor. So like there's hardly ever a really scary scene where someone's not like wisecracking all the way through it, kind of Buffy style. Because I think that kind of reassures the reader, like, yes, this is scary and you can enjoy the scary, but someone is here with you. There's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge going on here. Like, it's gonna be okay. This is terrible, but it's gonna turn out okay in the end. So I think that gives like a nice framework for people to have an escape for whatever is frightening them in real life. Because sometimes I personally like to use horror to regulate my nervous system, because there's a clear beginning to it, and I know that there's going to be a wrap up at the end, and it's going to be okay, generally speaking, especially if it's funny horror. So it's like a way that I can, if I find myself in an anxiety loop, I can pick up like a horror novel and read it from front to finish and kind of have like worked through my anxiety and given it closure that I wouldn't have gotten to have in real life, because real life is a lot more messy than books. So I think that's why I love it so much, and that's why I like writing it for readers so much, because I went through some trauma as a kid. I think a lot of young readers do, and many young people in my life who are middle grade reader age who have gone through some kind of trauma, like often if I ask their parents, like, is there anything that they need or want right now, or anything they'd like to read, almost without fail, they ask for a scary book. And I don't think that's accident. I think that people sometimes crave things that are a little bit larger than life, because it makes our problems seem a little bit more grounded. Like, things are going to be okay in the end. So that's why I love it. And I like to kind of try to make the voice or the narrative or the setting so strong and magical and humorous that it feels like you have a constant friend that's friendly throughout the entire book, even if the content is a little bit frightening, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So this question kind of made me laugh, because I am super like have no tolerance for scariness. Like, I can't watch Stranger Things. I have never read a Goosebumps book. Like, I am a huge wuss. And this is something that my husband and I are constantly like going toe to toe, that he's like, just tell yourself it's all fake. Like, imagine the movie cameras behind the scene. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. It will haunt me for the rest of my life. So I just don't do scary things. And so it was kind of a surprise to me that in The Stars of Whistling Ridge, like by the end, this idea of the magic draining out of the town, it gets really creepy. And like and so it was surprising when like critique partners like wrote back after reading kind of the second half of the book and were like, oh wow, it was so creepy, I loved it. And I was like, I can't do creepy, like it's too creepy for me, you know. So in general, I find that like for me, I tend to be on the very tame side of scary, but I agree a lot with what the others have said. I think for me, like anytime you are dealing with difficult ideas or difficult topics in a book, one of the things that I keep coming back to is that you want the kid to feel like your main character is supported in the things that they're experiencing. Like, they need to have good friends, or they need to have adults around them who are looking out for them, and so that they know that there are other people there. And I think that helps reassure kid readers that they can turn to and look for those people in their lives. And I think, you know, one of the cardinal rules of middle grade is that a middle grade story ends in a hopeful way. And so even if you've gone through a lot of darkness or a lot of spookiness or a lot of trauma, by the time you get to the end of the book, there's going to be hope. And I think, Ash, I thought what you said was so interesting about kind of using horror to reset your nervous system. And I think that catharsis is really powerful. And that when we can give kid readers that sense of catharsis, then they're going to feel a lot better, and they're going to be willing to kind of stick through whatever you throw at them.
Thank you. I was one of those kids who loved to be scared as well. And I always spent Saturday afternoons watching the Saturday afternoon horror show. We had our people, probably the most common reference is Elvira, right? You know, where you have those like local cable hosts who like play the old horror movies. I apologize for making this more about me, but I love to share this whenever possible. Our Saturday horror host was Dr. Paul Bearer, and he opened up on Saturday afternoons miming at the piano and lip singing "Poisoning Pigeons in the Park" by Tom Lehrer, and then played Hammer films, and and so I so appreciate also any event where Buffy and the Goonies and Rosemary's Baby are part of the conversation. And I also felt compelled to throw in Dr. Paul Bearer. And so, yeah, just, at like 8, 9, 10 years old, Saturday afternoons, I was watching, those really cheesy 1970s Dracula movies and stuff. probably really shouldn't have been, like Ash probably really shouldn't have been watching Rosemary's Baby, but like but it's so true that when you are young and there's stuff in your life that is challenging and perplexing, and sometimes painful, like there is really something about just, yeah, being scared and feeling that adrenaline and helping it to, helps you kind of push things through. So y'all are doing a service that way to young readers with these books. It is a little bit after 7. And I apologize to the audience and to y'all for running long. It's been such a great conversation. We have one more question that's a really good question. If you don't mind staying a little bit longer, and if the audience, if folks have had to bail, that's fine. They can, if you need to leave, just hold on to that link and come back and watch later, because it'll be worth it. All of your books have characters dealing with unfairness in some form. What do you hope readers who might be starting to experience different unfairnesses get from your books?
That's a really good question. So one of the biggest themes in my book is fear of change, especially change that you have no control over, and how Sibylline, my main character, really digs her feet in. And the more she digs her feet in, the worse the consequences become, until they are so bad that it has physically altered her and really changed her spirit. And until she admits that, like, this is something I need to figure out how to adapt to and how to make peace with, like, that's when she finally can figure out her way out of the situation that she's created for herself. So she really deals with that unfairness in 2 ways: of digging her feet in and saying, no, I will resist it. And then coming to realize, like, for me to move on in my life and not be stuck in this place, I have to figure out how I will make peace with it, so it doesn't turn me into something made of bitterness and anger. So it's really her figuring out how to make peace with something, even though that something is not fair at all to her or to her family. Yeah, because if she wouldn't have, then we would have a much different story.
That is such a good and heart question. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about my entire book is everything's unfair. It's unfair that, these kids are individually going through these things, and that you have a monster who is taking them just because he wants the power and he's going to use these things against them. I think one of the characters was like, fair is just a place where they judge pigs. Or I've heard that before. It's like, what is fair, and like they're trying to work out how to get beyond the fact that their lives are being stolen from them. Time has been stolen for them, and there's nothing they can do individually, but together they can like figure out how to not only help each other. So maybe the fairness is when it's directed specifically just a person isn't fair, but when you have a community around you and they rally together and they help each other, then you find another way or a better way or an answer, or you find a way to get past or through whatever you're dealing with. So I feel like at the end, each person is dealing with this grand unfairness, but when they come together to sort of fight against this, they find their place or their peace or their understanding, and they can push past anything that they've been individually dealing with. So again, I think for me, it's more about, yes, these things are unfair, but then what do you do with that? How then do you get past it? Do you have people around you who can help you see another way? And that's always important when you're dealing with situations like that. And I don't know if that answered the question at all, but I don't know. That's what I was thinking.
I wish I could just copy everything that Daka just said, because I think it's so good and so important. I think the themes that have run through my story about fairness and unfairness, like there are some things, I think sometimes there are like fairnesses, and then there are like ongoing injustices and learning how to like parse those things out from each other and figure out like I think the dividing line for me and for the characters in my story is usually what is it that I have personal control over. So can I let it go or not let it go? Because is it hurting me or not? Is it hurting me more to hang on to this than it is to let it go? But then again, like what Daka was saying, like often if you like zoom the camera out and see who else is experiencing it and how we can like combine community resources and our love for each other and our care for each other, like often we can find ways to overcome like the bigger injustices that are going on too. So it's kind of like what can I change, what can I not change, and what can I change if I let other people in, and if I choose to live in community, and if I choose to let my guard down and trust other people, and also you know, not focus quite so much on myself, but focus more on like a common goal that will benefit all of us. So yeah, it's like striking a balance between letting go and then like letting your guard down and letting other people in so that you can accomplish things together. Because like Daka said, there are some mountains you really can move, or in the case of my story, not move. If you work together and come up with creative solutions. Yeah.
Ash, you said that so much better, but yeah, exactly what you said.
I had a very good preamble to work with.
Yeah. Oh man, I love what everything has been said so far. And I love this question. I feel like honestly, like the entire way that I related to life and my whole self-concept from the ages of like 11 to 13 were based on unfairness on a whole lot of different levels. And I've noticed that with basically each of my books, my protagonists never really get their goals in the book. They always start off the book with something that they're convinced that they need to have to be happy. And then by the end of the book, they have come to recognize that that is not what they need to be happy, and that they need to find ways to be happy even if they never get that thing. And that is that's a hugely resonant and important theme to me, because that's something that has cropped up a lot in my life. And particularly when I was a preteen, I was born with a genetic disease called cystic fibrosis. And from the age of 11 to 13, I experienced a lot of things that felt really unfair. I had been fairly healthy through my childhood that I remembered. And when I started kind of going through puberty and then later hitting high school, that was when my health really changed. And I started experiencing things like being in the hospital for days and having to spend nights at the hospital by myself, which was really hard for me. And, you know, I had breathing treatments, an increasing number of breathing treatments every day that were time consuming. And sometimes I would wake up coughing in the night and I would have to do a treatment in the night. And there were all of these things that I was dealing with. And kind of right around that time also, I learned that my disease was life shortening, and that at the time, the life expectancy for a person with cystic fibrosis was only in the mid 30s, which I'm happy to say it's much better today. But there was a lot that I was processing in those middle grade years that felt profoundly unfair to me. And I spent a lot of time feeling kind of isolated from my friends, because I felt like my friends had no concept of any of the stuff that I was going through. And everybody had their own problems. But I sometimes felt like there was me over here dealing with all of these things, and then everybody else was dealing with crushes and who was going to go to the dance and things like that. And it just made me feel really, really lonely. And so that's something that I feel like I explore in each of my books, this idea that sometimes life is unfair, and you do. And Daka, I loved that you said that about life isn't a fair, because a fair is where you go judge pigs, because my mom for my entire life has said, well, if anyone says, that's not fair to her, she says, well, life isn't fair, because a fair is where you take pigs. So I've heard very few people say that, but that's one of her favorite phrases.
It's a Southern thing, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And to my daughter's chagrin, that is totally one of the things I swore I would never say as a mom, and I do say it all the time. But anyway, so I love exploring that theme in my book, and I feel like each book that I write it for those kids who feel like the lot that they have been handed is unfair, and like they don't know, they don't see frameworks and patterns in media for how they can learn to be happy and have vibrant and wonderful lives in those profoundly unfair situations. And so yeah, that's something that I love to explore.
Thank you so much. What a wonderfully sort of edifying way to wrap up this conversation. So appreciate all of you for sharing this evening and being so engaging. Just really enjoyed hearing you and talking with all of you. So I would like to just thank again all of our authors, Juliana Brandt, Daka Hermon, Cindy Baldwin, and Ash Van Otterloo. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you. Thank you so much. Congratulations on your books, and of course, good luck with the ones you're working on now. We look forward to whatever's coming up. And just a shout out to the Kid Zoo bombing. We're all about it. So. Thanks to everyone who's been with us this evening, particularly Samantha for your wonderful questions. Everyone, please stay safe and well. And I will say goodbye, but I'll leave the final goodbyes or words to the rest of y'all, to our authors, if y'all want to unmute and say goodnight.
Bye. Thank you
Thanks
for having us.
This was
Thank
so
you.
wonderful. Thank
This was
you.
wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yay.